The Armed Forces Radio Service invites you to share in the vivid, colorful stories just between us. Stories as told by one of America's master yarn spinners, Knox Manning.
This is Knox Manning with a few remarks just between us about the big melting pot, the ideal job, don't handle with care, and knives and forks. If you'd ask almost anyone what their mental image of the typical American is, their answer will no doubt run something like this. Well, we're a young people. Most of us live in a growing city or on a farm in a growing state. Most of us work in a factory or on a farm. We are of the melting pot, partaking of all the races and nationalities. Likely as not, our parents were born in Europe. These are some generally held impressions. But not one of these statements is true. The average age of Americans today is 30. It used to be 16. Another way of saying we are rapidly getting to be a nation in which old folk predominate. Most of our cities are not growing, and most of our states are losing population. Twice as many persons are employed in our service industries, trade, transportation, communications, as in factories or on farms. And we're getting to be as American as corn on the cob. Half the babies born in the United States in 1915 had one parent, at least, who was foreign-born. Now, 9 out of 10 babies have 2 American-born parents. We start our families earlier than we used to. The average age of the bridegroom in 1940 was 24.3 years. In 1890, 26.1. The 1940 bride was 21.6 years old. Her grandmother married at 22. Our birth rate, taking the long view, is declining. It fell from 25 births per 1,000 persons in 1915 to a low of 16.6 in 1933. But the birth rate rose to 17.6 in 1940 and to 21.5, its wartime peak, in 1943. The decline then started and is now over. There are 106 boys born for every 100 girls, and this approximate figure prevails the world over. However, males continue to die faster than females all through life, in peace as well as in war. So the ladies finally prevail by a considerable margin. There will be no shortage of husbands except among elders. When Miss America reaches her 21st birthday, her chances of marrying within the year are 15.5 out of 100, and her normal chances of ever marrying are 92 out of 100. 11 out of every 12 persons reaching the age of 15 will eventually marry. Yes, America is aging. Almost 1/4 of our people are over 45 already. Between 1930 and 1940, those over 65 rose about 35%. There will be 3 times as many people over 65 years of age in 1980 as there were in 1930. The increase in the aged will have many effects. An unusually large proportion of our people is now in the employable range of 20 to 59 years of age. More jobs have to be found now, but because fewer persons are approaching 20 and more persons are approaching 59, this large wave of extra workers will ultimately decrease. The rate of growth of our urban population has been slowing up since 1910. Large cities have practically ceased to grow within their corporate limits, with few temporary exceptions. Their suburban areas, however, are growing rapidly and will continue to grow. Half of us now live in 140 metropolitan districts made up of cities of over 50,000 population and adjoining townships. Industry is already beginning to decentralize with more but smaller factories outside the big cities. The proportion of our population on farms was standing still before the war at 23.1%. Every basic trend is against a back-to-the-farm movement. Better methods, better seeds, mechanization, and the wider use of fertilizers made possible vast acres and with fewer workers. The standard of living of those who remain on farms will increase if these better methods and means are used. The number of farms is decreasing, their size increasing. The proportion of our labor force employed in trade, transportation, and the service industries has been increasing for more than 100 years. These fields, excluding government, accounted for 45.8% of our civilians employed persons in 1940. Manufacturing employed 23.4%, while agriculture, forestry, and fisheries combined accounted for only 18.8%. Two definite mass migrations have taken place in recent years, the Grapes of Wrath Depression migration in the 30s and the late war boom migration. The West Coast states were big gainers in population along with Florida. A solid tier of states from North Dakota to Oklahoma were the big losers. Substantial increases in Maryland and Virginia really represent the growth of Washington, which has spilled over its own boundaries. This pattern of migration is a long and basic one. For example, there's no reason to look to a new reverse migration from the West Coast. New factories, more favorable freight rates, climate, and future trade with the Orient are among the factors favoring further growth there. By 1952, the population of Pacific states will probably exceed its war peak by a considerable margin. The West and Southeast will continue to gain, largely at the expense of the North and Northeast. During the war years, the number of women in rural farm areas decreased 11.3%, but increased in cities. Of this female migration cityward, 665,000 were between 14 and 24 years of age. These younger women have acquired new wants, tastes, and standards which will greatly affect their future outlook on life. Our long-run prospects are excellent. These people, of whom you are one, have what it takes. What we do with it is up to us. I wonder how many of us have wished for a job where we could be our own bosses, do a lot of traveling, and where no two assignments would ever be just alike. Sounds like a pipe dream, doesn't it? But Miss Frances Wells of Anchorage, Alaska, does have a job which includes all these things as well as much friendly enjoyment. Miss Wells owns and operates a shopping service, Arctic Trails it's called, that each year takes care of the shopping problems of hundreds of persons. But Miss Wells' clientele isn't of the get me 200 cases of nuts and bolts kind. Requests come by word of mouth, by mail, and ham radio. People who live in the States write her for touring information, maps, and souvenirs they forgot to get last summer. Such things as parkas, mucklucks, carved ivory, walrus tusks, etc. But the real business is in Alaska. The outside trade is just a sideline. The customers who live in Alaska order groceries, cat food, buttons, turtles, mining machinery, and so on. 80% of the merchandise is bought by Miss Wells in Anchorage. But through buyer agencies in all parts of the United States, the rarer articles are located. Regardless of how far Miss Wells must go to find them, the standard charge on all articles is 10%. This shopping service doesn't have any price lists or any catalogs. Its motto is merely, we buy anything and ship anywhere. In 1 month not long ago, Miss Wells filled orders for baby chicks, lumber, drugs, firemen's hats, trouser alterations, books. A man who lived in Kodiak sent a wire for 6 pairs of number 1 horseshoes. After searching for them vainly, Miss Wells inquired, only horseshoes available are official pitching shoes. Will these do? Back came the reply, nope. Need these to put between horse and ground. Thanks. A chief living at the Hooper Bay Eskimo settlement got an outboard motor and also 10 big black outside rabbit skins. The rabbit skins were for mucklucks, and apparently anyone who is anyone, socially speaking, at that Eskimo settlement wears pelts that are imported. Well, you can see what a job Frances Wells has in getting the stuff and shipping it out. Of course, there's the other big problem, too, of seeing that the merchandise arrives at its destination in usable condition. That can get to be a big problem, too. Did you know that during World War II, the well-known definition of logistics as the right thing at the right place at the right time was revised to include in usable condition? It was estimated that in 1942, only 45% of the materiel shipped arrived in usable condition. But by 1945, the losses had been cut down to 25%, and now it's hoped that it will be even less than 5%. A great deal of credit for reducing the losses goes to the Packaging Development Branch of the Engineer Research and Development Laboratories at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. You see, their aim is to prevent damage to materiel either because of shipment in faulty containers or from internal damage such as results from corrosion or fungi. And believe me, it's a big job. The container must, for example, be designed so that it can be moved by truck, rail, ship, airplane, glider, or any other transportation available. It must be designed so that it can be safely dropped from the air, moved on rollers, handled by forklift trucks, lifted in a cargo net, and dragged by a tractor without damage to the contents. Each of these problems is met and solved by a specially designed testing device in the up-to-date packaging laboratory. First, containers are subjected to a vibration test, which simulates the vibrations and jogs encountered during all methods of transportation, such as rough road beds, car sway, and so on. Containers of all types are tested with this apparatus. and after the effects of vibration are measured, the container is corrected or discarded. Next, a revolving hexagonal drum determines the ability of the container to withstand rough handling. Then the container is given an incline impact test, which determines its ability to withstand impact stresses. These and other tests determine how well a container will stand up and what changes in design should be made to improve it. After this, there is a second big job at the packaging laboratory, preventing deterioration of material during shipment or in storage. Extreme temperatures, rain, sand, mud, humidity, and salt spray must be taken into consideration. For these tests, there are climatic laboratories, accelerated weathering machines, and a submersion tank. Although the packaging development branch can duplicate in its own laboratory almost any conditions met in the field, nevertheless, quite a bit of testing is also carried on in the field under actual handling and storage conditions. So favorable have been the results from this continuous research that many of the practices developed have been adopted by private industry for both domestic and overseas shipment and storage. So, although the destination is the North Pole, an African jungle, or just the next town, the packaging development branch will see that the order arrives safely, whether the item is a D8 tractor, a fragile incandescent light bulb, or a shipment of new knives and forks for the mess hall. Since we seem to have wound up with silverware, did you know that people didn't start using eating forks until considerably after spoons and knives were in common use at table? Eating forks were first used in Italy, but for years forks were regarded as a superfluous luxury. The fact is that writers of that day exhorted people not to use them. One Italian writer, in a letter to a lady, warned her against the sins of luxury by telling her about the wife of a Venetian doge whose luxurious way of living was beyond imagining. According to him, he wrote, she would not even wash in common water, but had the cruelty to compel her servants to collect rainwater for her. But what is more monstrous, this wicked creature would not eat with her fingers, but absolutely had her food cut into pieces rather small by her attendants, and then she actually conveyed them to her mouth with certain golden two-pronged forks. For many hundreds of years, forks were considered so precious that they were listed with the most costly and valuable possessions of nobles and royalty. After Edward I of England died in 1307, there was included in an inventory of his treasures 1 gold fork, 6 silver forks, and 1 pair of table knives with crystal handles. Forks were also listed on the inventories of other kings as though they had been crown jewels. For a long time, the people of England held out against using forks in their country. In fact, the English regarded users of forks as sinners. The first fork was brought to England from Italy by a man named Thomas Coryate. While traveling in Italy, he'd seen the Italians using forks when they ate their meat, and it seemed to him so much cleaner than touching the food with fingers that he thought that this was a good custom to imitate. But Coryate was laughed at for his affectation, satirized on the stage as the fork-carrying traveler, and sternly rebuked from the pulpit for his impiety in assuming that God's good gifts were unfit to be touched by human hands. One English author asked, why should a man make hay of his food and pitch it into his mouth with a fork? It was generally considered that the best eating implement was the tip of a knife, unless the person wanted to put on unnecessary dog. Although Coryate's friends didn't go along with his ideas about using forks, he kept on using one despite others' ridicule. And eventually, society did accept the table fork. Using table forks greatly affected table manners, and not only that, but also greatly influenced the development of cookery. There were more solid foods used. Before then, when all people had to eat with were the spoon and knife, it was necessary to cook food to a soft stew. Forks also promoted cleanliness, which was unknown in the time when fingers were the sole eating requirement. It was some time after forks were in common use before the hostess was expected to furnish silverware for the guests. A gentleman who was invited to dinner either brought his own knife, fork, and spoon with him, or sent them by his servant. Well, I don't have a servant here to tell me, but I see that my time is up, so just between us, that's it for today.
You have just heard Knox Manning in another of his informal and informative programs of storytelling just between us. This program was produced by Carl Hoffenberg. This is the United States Armed Forces Radio Service, the voice of information and education. Armed Forces Radio Service invites you to share in the vivid, colorful stories just between us. Stories as told by one of America's master yarn spinners, Knox Manning.
This is Knox Manning with a few remarks just between us about the heart of America, the soda pop habit, Can Do Plus, and a little advice about parent and children relations. A while back, a learned prof earnestly put forward the claim that we simply must save our vast cities. Because, so the professor said, the cities are our only sources and centers of American culture. Of course, it's just one man's opinion, but I think the learned gentleman was way off the beam when he put out that statement. Main Street on Saturday night in thousands of little towns is a good cross-section of the real heart of America. That's where you'll find the country folks who've come in to do some shopping, and most important of all, some visiting and exchanging ideas with other people. That Saturday evening trip to town is a cherished, leisurely part of country living. Father and the boys get the chores done a little early. The baked beans, sweet tomato pickle, hot corn bread, deep dish apple pie, and glasses of cold, rich milk taste even better because of the trip to come. Mother and the girls hustle to do up the dishes while Father cuts what he calls the best growing crop on the farm, meaning, of course, his whiskers, and changes to his second-best suit. Then the eggs, perhaps a few bushels of fruit, and yes, a carton of pound Prince of butter are loaded into the car trunk. City dwellers would be amazed if they knew how many good farmers still plan to take something to sell when they go to town. And there are still many stores where the signs tell the truth when they say general merchandise, groceries, hardware, grain, clothing, notions. Such stores have a look and a feel that's especially American, I think. There's a kind of a pioneer atmosphere of resourcefulness and self-reliance about them. But the real spirit of Main Street on Saturday night hasn't anything to do with the marts of trade. The real spirit is the friendliness of neighboring with others, catching up on the news of the countryside, discussing crops and weather and livestock. It's the political discussions, all the way from who will be the next man to run the county road job to who will be the next president. It's the freedom of speech. It's the certainty that another's opinion is worth something. It's the give and take of free men who work and fight hard and honestly. It's the belief that ordinary people can do something to make life better if they'll only get in and try. Main Street on Saturday night is a great public forum of a great nation. That's where America is, not in the art museums and concert halls of any big city. At least that's my opinion. Speaking of our country, did you know that to quench America's thirst, in 1946 that is, 80,000 employees worked like beavers in 5,700 bottling plants? They had to work hard. Each American consumed an average of 100 bottles and glasses of soda pop during a year. In 1850, only 64 bottling plants were functioning. Today, 18 billion soft drinks worth $600 million pour down the gullets of thirsty Americans. There are 120,000 soda fountains in drugstores and sweet shops throughout the United States. To them comes a daily average of 20 million patrons. The thirst-quenching business goes back to before 1772. Then the only effervescing waters came from a few natural wells. If you remember your ancient history, you know that even the Romans loitered at the wells for the refreshment. Well, anyway, chemist Joseph Priestley, driven out of England, settled in the village of Northumberland in the colony of Pennsylvania. His chemical experiments were diabolical, townspeople contended. The chemist had discovered oxygen, and through many experiments came upon the solubility of carbon dioxide. Unexpectedly, he fell upon the formula which gave a sparkling water similar to that found in the springs of Europe. It was carbonated water without today's sweet flavor. Another chemist, Townsend Speakman, gave birth to the soft drink. A doctor had hired the chemist to prepare some of this effervescing water for his patients. As an experiment, he added a dash of syrup to the water, and soft drinks went on their million-dollar way. However, the discovery brought no profits for 30 years. A few ferreted out the secret and concocted their own preparations, but without too much success. In appearance, the first soda fountain resembled a water cooler outgrowing itself. A 5 or 10 gallon jug was placed on top of a cabinet, which, packed with ice, tended to cool it as it was drawn off. Several smaller jugs of flavoring syrups graced the front on either side of the tap. Vanilla and lemon predominated. The early fountains used sodium bicarbonate in the water. Today, this is eliminated from soda pop and the fountain soft drinks. The sodium bicarbonate then was mixed with the flavoring syrups containing citric or tartaric acid. A fizz resulted. Egg white also produced a smooth foam. Frequently you hear the old superstition that certain cola drinks contain some form of potent drug. This is, of course, false. The cola-type beverages do contain caffeine, about 1/4 of the amount of caffeine found in a cup of coffee. There are about 50 flooding the market, but one outsells all others combined, the Coca-Cola Company. When the temperature soars, watch the lineups at the soda fountains for a quick drink of pop. The soda pop fountain may only be a little over 100 years old, but it looks like it's headed for the age of Methuselah. Right now, I'd like to tell you about a particular group in the armed forces that is nowhere near the age of Methuselah. In fact, it's almost the baby among all service groups. I'm referring to the Navy Construction Battalion, or as they're better known, the Seabees. The Seabees were born in a time of desperate crisis. It was on December 28, 1941, that they first came into existence. An enemy had just delivered a blow more devastating than even its perpetrators realized. We needed many things with which to defend ourselves and turn the tide of war. One of the things we needed very badly was construction men with military status, trained to defend what they built. And so the Navy's construction battalions were organized, and the Bureau of Yards and Docks asked for men to fill them. The call was out, and unanimously the ranks of labor and the contractors of America answered the call. Almost overnight, the Seabees sprang into existence. The sound of their hammers and bulldozers soon were heard in all parts of the world. Airstrips appeared with startling speed where nobody had ever set an airplane down before or had ever wanted to. Roads were laid as fast, it seemed, as lava flowing down the side of a volcano. The reputation of the CB Can-Do spread around the world. Today, as the United States meets another crisis, the Seabees stand ready to join with the rest of the military in defending America from her enemies. You all know how the armed services have gone to great lengths to work out a system whereby each man is assigned to work in which he has experience or for which he shows aptitude. Well, the Seabees have carried this system one step further. From now on, CB apprentices will go to the movies to choose their jobs. A new film, photographed at the Construction Battalion Training Center at Port Hueneme, California, describes briefly each of the 7 general classifications into which construction work is divided. The apprentice then decides, on the basis of what he's seen of older CBs in action, whether he wants to be trained as a builder, driver, steel worker, or any of the other rates. The title of the film is CB Can-Do Plus. The success of the Seabees in the past should be enhanced by this new job selection and become Success Plus. You know, 9 times out of 10, when you ask an old person where it was he thinks he made the most mistakes in his long life, he'll say without hesitation, I made the biggest mistake in worrying about things that never happened. That's a mistake that most of us are pretty sure to make. We get ourselves all het up and lose a lot of perfectly good sleep worrying about this or that. We know that worry doesn't make a bit of sense, and it never did anybody a bit of good, but still we go on worrying. Seems like we feel it's our duty to at least do a certain amount of worrying about a problem, if only to show that we gave the problem some thought. You look back on it later, you get a smile out of the way you felt, all the worrying you did. But at the time, it's not so funny. What do we worry most about? Well, our health, our money, or the lack of it, and those we love, our kids. Especially our kids. We worry about what will happen to them when maybe we won't be around anymore to help them out, to help them over the bumps in the road, to shield them when it looks like the world's picking on them. This is all very natural. It's part of our love for them. We can't anymore be blamed for being anxious for our children than we can be taken to task for breathing. But we sure can be called on the carpet if we let our worries get the better of us. That's just so much you can do for your kid, you know. You can clothe and feed and shelter and guide the youngster, but you can't run his life or her life. The time will come when you'll find the child deciding what he wants to do and will do without consulting you. Or if he does consult you, it'll not mean necessarily that your wishes in the matter, your advice, will be a law to him. And the sooner you teach yourself to take this age-old truth in stride, the easier it'll be for you. You can let yourself in for an awful lot of heartache if you become a complete victim of your worries about your son or your daughter. You may feel sure that they're making a great mistake. Say you have a business you want your son to take over. You've worked a good many years getting things lined up and under control, all ready for your son to step in and take over in your place. Then, bam, he ups and says he wants to do something else. It knocks all your hopes and plans for him in the head. It wipes out the goal you've been knocking yourself out for all these years. What are you going to do? Well, it doesn't matter too much what you do, because whether you insist or you don't insist, he's pretty likely to turn down your offer and go on in the direction he's chosen. And you may think that is sheer lunacy. You can't see a single ray of hope for his future. But you can't tell. Who are you to think that because your experience along that line have all been negative, your son is doomed to a life of failure in it? Presumably, he knows what he's doing. You've brought him up and trained him to use the head on his shoulders. Give him a chance to think on his own, to make his own mistakes if need be. It may turn out that what looks like a mistake to you is the smartest thing he ever did. You know, I've always liked this little story that Bruce Barton told some time ago. It's a mighty fine illustration of the very thing I've been talking about. Parental interference brought about by parental concern for the child, and how little good it does. It seems that when Floyd Gibbons, the famous radio commentator and lecturer of a few years back, was a young man, he got a job as a reporter on a Minneapolis newspaper. Young Gibbons was fascinated by the newspaper game and had made up his mind that a newspaper career was for him. William G. Shepard, the author, was the city editor on the paper at that time. And one day he called young Gibbons to his office for no apparent reason and fired him, shouting, "You're the worst reporter in the world. You're fired. And what's more, I'd advise you to get out of the newspaper business entirely." This was a terrible blow to the young reporter, to be fired so definitely and without any cause. But he went right out and got another job. Yes, you guessed it, as a reporter on a newspaper. Some years later, when both Shepard and Floyd Gibbons were famous men, they happened to be lecturing at the same time in the same town. They left the town on the same train. That was the first time they'd seen each other since the day Shepard had fired Gibbons. As they settled down together on the train, Shepard said, "Do you remember the day I fired you?" "Do I?" said Gibbons. "I've been waiting for this minute ever since that day." "Well," said Shepard, "I'd like to tell you the rest of that. You never heard the inside story, I suppose." Gibbons said, "What inside story?" "Well, the morning of the day I fired you, I had a caller in my office. He was a very distinguished-looking man with a red beard. He said to me, 'You have a cub reporter on this paper, and I want you to do me and him a favor. I want you to fire him.' I asked the man why he thought he had the authority to ask me to do a thing like that, and he said, 'I'm a newspaper man, and I don't want that kid to be one. I know what it's like, and I don't want him in it. You see, I'm his father.'" There was Floyd Gibbons' father worrying about what the future would do to his boy if the boy got into the newspaper racket, trying, from the goodness of his father's heart, to run the boy's life. And the future proved the old man to have been simply meddling. "Well, the engineer isn't my father, but he's decided to meddle in this program. His signal says if I don't sign off, I'll be cut off. Oh, well, just between us, that's it for today."
You've been listening to Knox Manning in another of his programs of storytelling. Do you have a story you'd like to share with our other listeners? If so, send it along to Knox Manning, Armed Forces Radio, Los Angeles, USA. This is the United States Armed Forces Radio Service, the voice of information and education. The Armed Forces Radio Service invites you to share in the vivid, colorful stories Just Between Us. Stories as told by one of America's master yarn spinners, Knox Manning.
This is Knox Manning with a few remarks just between us about a unique landing aboard a carrier, an emperor's big mistake, unusual wedding rings, and the second-hand dealer. Landing a plane on the deck of a carrier requires an amount of skill under normal circumstances. When, in addition, the situation is complicated by the fact that the plane is damaged and the flyer not only wounded but blinded, making a successful landing sounds like a pretty impossible maneuver. Yet, that thrilling feat is exactly what happened recently on the flight deck of the carrier Philippine Sea. The incident was the first of its kind in the United States Navy aviation history. This is how it all started. While flying his jet plane at 350 miles an hour during strikes over the Han River south of Seoul, Ensign Edward D. Jackson, Jr. of Memphis struck a booby-trap cable strung by North Korean communists to prevent low-level bombing and strafing. He was knocked unconscious. The jet's right wingtip was shattered, and the windshield and canopy were smashed. He regained consciousness about 20 seconds later, and Ensign Jackson found his eyes clouded with blood from face cuts. The jet was climbing in a steep turn. Leveling off and reducing speed to lessen the terrific wind force in the open cockpit, Ensign Jackson then radioed his plight to his wingman, Ensign Dale E. Crow. In close formation, with the wingman guiding the injured pilot via radio, the two jets flew the 120 miles back to the carrier. As the crucial moment for landing approached, Ensign Crow jockeyed the blinded pilot into a landing approach position. On deck, the carrier's landing signal officer dropped his hand signals to give directions by radio, and Ensign Jackson began his breathtaking landing. The jet, which was capable of more than 600 miles per hour, eased gently to the deck, landing slightly to one side, but otherwise, according to the Navy, a normal landing. As the plane bounced to a standstill, a flight surgeon climbed to the cockpit and wiped the blood from the pilot's eyes. Then, for the first time, Ensign Jackson saw the flight deck. To tell you anything else would be anticlimactic, but I must tell you that several days later, Ensign Jackson, recovered from injuries, was launched from the carrier for a test flight in his repaired plane. Such is the stuff our fighting men are made of. You know, there's one human failing which seems to be universal. The chances are everybody has a touch of it in his makeup. I'm talking about the failure to appreciate what we already have until we're on the verge of losing it or have lost it. We're that way about our health. We don't usually value it or take proper care of it until it begins to slip or is lost. We often have the same attitude toward our jobs, our friendships, our homes, and even our families. Many a man or woman has rushed into the divorce court after a petty quarrel with his wife or husband and got a separation by law, only to find out afterwards what a mistake he'd made and how much this ex-husband or wife really meant to him or to her. We don't appreciate the joy of having young children at home. Kids are an awful bother. That is, we don't until they've grown up and gone, and then we know. As the old song says, we never miss the sunshine until the shadows fall. And I guess most of us don't. The most common reasons why people fail to value what they have while they have it is because they're always looking for something more, something bigger, shinier, or better. Sometimes, though less often with ordinary people, it's because they have so much that they don't even know what they do have. This was the case with an old-time Chinese emperor. Emperor Yuan Ti was of the Han dynasty. He had so many concubines in his royal harem that he never even set eyes on most of them. What he saw in most instances was only their portraits. The court painter, whose name was Mao Yanshu, painted each concubine's picture. The emperor looked at that and decided whether or not he was interested. Naturally, it was considered a great honor and a great triumph for a gal when the emperor ordered her to be brought before him. The concubines tried to win the court painter's favor by giving him presents, so that when he painted their portrait, he'd make it look very beautiful, and the emperor would want to see them. A girl named Chao Chun was the loveliest of all the emperor's concubines, but she didn't bother to bribe the court painter with gifts because she had such confidence in her natural beauty and charm. She was sure that her portrait would be attractive enough if Mao Yanshu painted her just as she actually looked. But the court painter, because this gal hadn't given him any presents, spitefully painted a portrait of her that wasn't anywhere near as beautiful as she really was. So the emperor didn't send for her, and he never knew how lovely she was until it was too late. A while after this portrait was painted, the Shang Yu, the great Khan of the Huns, as he was called in Europe, paid his first visit to the court of Peking. The Emperor of China, wanting to stand in good with this powerful neighbor of his, decided he'd offer the great Khan a wife. And the one he gave him was the beautiful Chao Chun, whom the emperor had never seen. When the Khan and his bride appeared before the emperor, at the time the visiting big boy was taking his leave, the emperor was so astonished when he saw how beautiful the girl was that all he could do was stare at her with his mouth hanging open. He couldn't say a word. And now he'd gone and given away this transcendentally lovely beauty, not knowing how wonderful she was. As soon as the great Khan left, taking his bride with him, the emperor gave the court painter and the concubines who'd bribed him their comeuppance. And how? That very same day, he had their heads cut off in the marketplace. But the emperor never forgot Chao Chun's beauty. He was always haunted by bitter regrets for the happiness he might have had if he had only known. Since we mentioned wives, let's keep in the wedding vein. You know that ancient saying that marriages are made in heaven? Well, one American couple, John Carter and Miriam Connolly, thought that, since that was true, what could be more appropriate for wedding rings than rings made from parts of heaven? They decided that the customary gold bands just wouldn't do to symbolize their perfect union. So these two romantic souls put their heads and hearts together and came up with an idea. They'd have their wedding rings made from matter that sailed the seven seas of heaven among the stars. In other words, from meteors that had most likely been parts of stars themselves. But right here, the loving couple ran into a snag. Where could they find a meteorite? They asked their friends, but the friends didn't know. They inquired of jewelers. They consulted libraries, but no meteorites. Finally, somebody suggested the astronomy department of a university, and the astronomy professor there told them to go to the Hayden Planetarium of the American Museum in New York City. Well, sure enough, small pieces of meteorites could be bought at the planetarium, but the catch was to find a fragment that two rings could be made from. When the surface area of a fragment was large enough, its cross-section was too irregular, and when the top and bottom were sufficiently parallel, the surface was either too large or too small. After considerable looking around and trying to figure which piece of meteorite would be best, they finally purchased a fragment some 2 by 3 inches in area and about half an inch thick. They paid $2.50 for it. The attendant at the planetarium told them that this piece was part of the huge meteorite that crashed in Arizona more than 20,000 years ago. The next thing these people were up against was finding someone to make the rings. Jewelers didn't want to do it, said they didn't have the tools for the job. So the couple hunted up a model craftsman. He said he'd try to make the rings, but he wouldn't promise anything. And this guy certainly tried, we can say that for him. You see, that meteorite was just about 95% iron and 5% nickel, plus a minute quantity of exceedingly hard impurities, which were presumably diamond particles. The rings cost $50 apiece, which is several times what it would cost to buy gold wedding rings of the same simple design. But the lovers didn't mind the extra expense. They considered the investment worth it, because pieces of heaven were on their fingers, and heaven was in their hearts. Well, I don't suppose I have to tell you that every business has its problems and risks, and the second-hand business is certainly no exception. Have you ever tried selling some of your old tables or chairs or what have you to a second-hand store? You may remember that when you offered your stuff to the dealer, he sized you up very carefully, asked you a lot of questions before he bought anything. He doesn't do this out of idle curiosity. He's doing it for a very sound reason: self-defense. The dealer in used merchandise wants to be very sure, before he buys anything, that it isn't stolen goods. And some second-hand dealers say that the more like an honest, law-abiding householder a stranger with something to sell appears to be, the more it behooves the dealer to be on his guard and remember that motto the old Romans had, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. In some cities, at least, perhaps in all of them, I don't know, the dealer has to make a report to the police of the property he's bought from individuals. He's required to report such things as typewriters, sewing machines, musical instruments, and all merchandise that bears a serial number the day after he receives them. And he must wait a certain number of days before he sells them or disposes of them in any other way. The report blank that was used in Santa Monica, California in 1935, and which may still be in use so far as I know, called for the following data with regard to goods: amount paid, article, kind, color, size or length, number, inscription, or other marks. Regarding the person the deal was made with, name, address, sex, age, height, build, complexion, color and style of beard, and the color and style of dress. So, naturally, when a man or woman who's a perfect stranger greets a dealer with, would you be interested in buying thus and such? The dealer may scrutinize the lady or gentleman a bit more thoroughly than the etiquette books consider to be polite. But the dealer is trying to fix in his mind all those many points he needs to put into his report, particularly height and age, and the precautions he takes in the way of studying people train him to be, after a while, a pretty good judge of character. Even though a second-hand dealer all unknowingly buys something that's been stolen, he stands a chance of being involved in some unpleasant situation. Even if the thing isn't traced and the police haven't received any report of its loss, the possibility of trouble is still there. Let's say the dealer sells the article and the real owner sees it in somebody else's possession. This somebody has come by it honestly because they've paid good money for it in the second-hand store. The dispute that may result between the owner and the one who has the thing now may not be calmed down until the dealer appeases his customer by paying him to compensate him for having to give up the disputed thing to the person who claimed it. Suppose this article was reported as stolen to the police, and they find it listed on the report the dealer sends in. They bring the owner to the store. He identifies the article as belonging to him, and if he's a reasonable person, he knows the dealer didn't know the stuff was stolen when he bought it. Also, the owner is glad to have his property back, so he reimburses the second-hand dealer for what he paid to the thief, and the loser's wrath is generously taken by the owner. But if he isn't such a benevolent, reasonable person, if he's the kind who simply demands his property and doesn't give a hoot who loses just so he isn't the one, then the dealer and the claimant may have to settle the matter between themselves. The police, in locating the stolen goods, have done their part. Now their chief concern is to catch the thief. The dealer may end up by taking the entire loss, in which case about all he can do is grin and bear it. And he also resolves that he'll be more careful next time. You know, some years ago, a dealer innocently bought a more than 100-year-old spinning wheel that was in perfect condition for the small sum of $5, and a walnut table, one of those Victorian affairs with a marble top, for $4.50. He purchased them from a man, a plausible stranger, who told the dealer he was leaving town in something of a hurry, which, as a matter of fact, he did. The man said he couldn't be bothered with these family heirlooms. The fellow appeared to be honest and put up a convincing story. It afterwards developed that both the spinning wheel and the table had been pinched from his mother-in-law. The lady claimed the items a week or so later through the police. She was so pleased to get her treasures back that she gladly refunded the amount the dealer had paid the on-his-way son-in-law. Well, I haven't anyone's furniture to sell, but I better be on my way regardless, so just between us, that's it for today.
You've been listening to Knox Manning in another of his highly interesting and entertaining programs of storytelling. Mr. Manning will be back in a few days with more stories and anecdotes just between us. This is the United States Armed Forces Radio Service, the voice of information and education. The Armed Forces Radio Service invites you to share in the vivid, colorful stories Just Between Us. Stories as told by one of America's master yarn spinners, Knox Manning.
This is Knox Manning with a few remarks just between us about mysterious ponies, water, a radio-controlled lifeboat, your heart, and a little something on pain. Toward the middle of summer, a band of mystery ponies are rounded up on the uninhabited island of Assateague, a sliver of rock and sand 4 miles off the Virginia coast. The stumpy animals are driven across a shallow channel to the island of Chincoteague and herded into a corral. The next day, the ponies, whose owners know almost nothing about the animals' origin, are auctioned off at prices ranging from $10 to $100. The buyers will be among some 15,000 tourists on the island to witness Chincoteague's 101st Pony Penning Day. Pony Penning Day was probably first held about 1700. Its modern popularity is best explained by the ponies' mysterious background. Nobody knows where they came from or how they got on the island. Then there is a denser riddle. What are the ponies? Horses or ponies? These are the only type of its kind in the world. The ponies average only 4 1/3 feet in height, which is slightly taller than the Shetland pony, but much smaller than a horse. They're faster than most horses, less docile than ponies. The pony or horse question has been answered in many ways. The Chincoteague pony is a remnant of the prehistoric wild horse. North America swarmed with horses up until 30,000 years ago. Then they were wiped out, probably by disease. There were no more horses on the continent until the Spanish imported them. The island's ponies are descendants of the prehistoric horses, saved from disease by their complete isolation. Other theories are, since a shipwreck explains the origin of Chincoteague's first settlers, it seems a plausible explanation. About 1618, 3 brothers named Wheelton sailed from England to America. Off the Maine coast, their ship was wrecked. The brothers survived. But did they have horses in the first settlement? But it's doubtful if the horses swam from Maine to Chincoteague. This is giving the horses too much credit. To answer the long-distance swim question, other islanders employ a Spanish galleon tale. According to this story, the galleon sank on the rocks near the island. But this theory also sinks when the tourist asks what happened to the Spanish sailors. It's improbable that they all died so close to land, especially when the horses reached the shore. So the theories go on. The Chincoteague pony riddle will probably remain a thought-provoking game for the amateur husbandman, a minor but curious footnote in history books, but still a riddle. And while we're on the subject, riddles, here's one for you. How much water should you drink? If you should ask 20 different people, chances are you'd get 20 different answers. If you ask the question on a hot day, one person will be sure to tell you to drink a lot of water, to keep cool, and the next person will tell you to drink as little as possible so that you won't perspire so much. At the dinner table, a mother will tell the children not to drink so much water, that it's downright unhealthy. Some woman complains about being overweight and is advised to cut down on drinking water. And there are those in the world who seem to be afraid to drink any water at all, believing that it'll rust their iron constitution. They drink alcohol instead. The truth about the water drinking has got a lot of hard-to-believe facts in it. Your body is not only filled up to 66% with water, but with salt water at that. And there's a reason for that. As animals developed and came from the ocean onto the land, they brought the salt water with them. They'd been adapted to it. It was a part of them, so they just kept it. And now we can't live without that salt as a part of our diet. But leaving the salt out of the picture entirely, we've still got that 66% water to account for, and the little matter of keeping it replaced as fast as we lose it. And we really lose it. We lose about a pint a day in just breathing. Just blow your breath in a glass and see the moisture left there. If you breathed in a glass all day, you'd collect a pint of water in that glass. And we lose twice that much through the skin, just with invisible perspiration. And when we exercise enough to be able to see the water coming through our pores, that's just extra loss. Add to that the fact that normal internal elimination costs another quart per day, and the total loss on the part of the average adult is 3 quarts of water per day. The natural question that follows is, well, you don't expect me to drink 3 quarts of water each day, do you? And the answer is, certainly not. The water you get is going to come from the food you eat rather than from the water you drink. There are few foods you can find that don't have a high percentage of water. Peanut butter, crackers, and dried coconut don't have much water, but most of the others have a very high percentage. You'd be surprised. Even the things that you consider pretty solid foods, like beans, baked beans, are from 68 to 70% water. Corned beef is from 50 to 62% water. Cooked chicken will run as high as 65% water, and cooked beef from 50 to 62%. Whole eggs are from 73% to 75% water. Bananas, 75%. Good, sturdy old beef stew, the kind that sticks to your ribs. It'll have to do a lot of sticking because its rating is from 83 to 88% water. Even a dry food like cake will assay 25% water. So actually, you drink while you eat. If you lived on fruits and vegetables, you could go a long, long time without a drink. You could pull a camel act and go the camel one better. What water you drink will depend on the simple matter of drinking when you're thirsty and not over-drinking. A little at a time rather than a lot at once. Give the liquid a chance to move on. And don't get to thinking too much about that 66% water which you are. It's weakening to consider, and it doesn't make you a drip. And while we're on this wet subject, let's take a big body of water. Now let's add a disabled plane which has crashed in the water. Now, what happens? Well, a radio-controlled lifeboat will chug up, stand by while the survivors board, and then sail away on a gyro-compass course for the nearest land or ship, completely guided by the operator in the Air Force SB-29 rescue plane which dropped the lifeboat. That's one of the latest developments in air rescue work. Before this, the boat was dropped in the vicinity of the survivors with an allowance for drift. If all went well, the survivors' raft drifted down to the boat. But now, with the new radio control system, the boat will come to them. After the lifeboat is dropped, the operator in the airplane takes over on a 5-frequency transmitter, which is matched by a receiver in the boat. This way, he can completely control the speed and course of the boat. He stops it when it comes up to the survivors' raft and idles the motor while they board. Then he sets the A3 on its course. The boat itself is equipped with a duplicate set of controls and a manual override which would enable the survivors to break off the radio control at any time they may wish. The lifeboat has a walkie-talkie radio set for communication between the rescued men and the plane. There are rations, survivor equipment, and gasoline enough to cruise 800 miles. If the distance is greater than that, the boat can be resupplied from the air since its present course will be known. So there it is again, another step in the forward strides taken by the armed forces for the benefit of the men in the service. Well, you know the heart is the one organ in your body that begins to function long before birth and stops only at the moment of death. And your heart will tell what kind of a life you lead. Basically, the heart is a pump. It circulates the blood through a long, complicated system of tubes, the arteries, veins, and capillaries. When it expands, the blood flows out through various valves, makes its way to the lungs, gives up its carbon dioxide, and returns carrying oxygen for the tissues of the body. Since the heart's own muscles also require oxygen, they have their own arteries, which take up 1/20 of the entire blood volume. The tubes that carry blood to the muscles of the heart are called coronary blood vessels. Any disturbance in the circulation of the blood through these vessels causes serious incapacity and often a great deal of pain. If the blood then clots, the clot appears in the heart after death. The heart of a child at birth weighs less than an ounce. The heart of an adult weighs at least half a pound. The heart beats 100 times a minute in a small child and 60 to 80 times a minute in an adult. This pump can circulate 500 gallons of blood a day. In 1900, heart disease was third after tuberculosis and pneumonia among causes of death in the United States. By 1929, it was first, and still is. One reason, of course, is the tremendous improvement in controlling the infectious diseases of childhood and adolescence. But the research that helped to stamp out those infectious diseases is the same kind of research that could help us to prevent conditions that interfere with the heart and cause untimely death. Such conditions are many. They can be classified by their causes, the changes they produce in the body, their relationship to other diseases, the methods of control and treatment, and their likelihood of destroying vocational ability or life itself. As the child grows to maturity, it enters a competitive world. Life today is a grinding struggle for success. Perhaps the mind, nerves, and blood vessels of men were never constituted for modern-day stresses. Perhaps the machine age is too much for the human machine. In any event, too many leaders in our society die far too young of the disease that affects the heart. Some men seem more intelligent about living than others. Some have lived to well-advanced years and continued extraordinary careers. Take former Chief Justice Hughes, active past 80. Dr. W. W. Keene, who conducted an active campaign in behalf of medical research when he was past 90. Goethe wrote Faust at 80. Titian painted the Battle of Lepanto at 98. We need to know the factors that make for long life and effectiveness in the years beyond 70. This should be a challenge, not only to the doctor and the researcher, but to you, too, as a human being. Your heart tells how you live, and how you live may well decide how long you live. And while we're on the subject of living, it seems that there are a lot of folks that go around in pain every day, in pain all the time, and say nothing about it. Maybe you have your aches, too. Somehow we seem to get used to pain. That's a fact. We even forget about it at times. It's still there because when we stop thinking about something else, why, there it is. But those people, the ones who hurt all the time, they don't seem to be afraid of pain anymore. And the funny thing is that the people that pain pains most is the people who haven't got any pains. Maybe I better say that over. The people that pain hurts most is the people who haven't got any pains. It's the fear of pains that's so darned uncomfortable. We're scared it might hurt, and it does hurt. Let me tell you something that might be comforting to you. It was to me when I found it out. If you've lived a normal life and have the usual number of cuts and bruises and aches and burns that such a life entitles you to have, you've suffered as much pain as you ever will, no matter what happens. For example, if you were to wake up some night in a cold sweat having dreamed that you're burned at the stake, forget it. You dreamed that it hurt something awful. But if you were to hold one finger in a flame, and most of us have had burns as bad as that one finger would hurt just as bad as if you were burned at the stake. The pain would be just as intense. Increasing the area in which pain is caused does not increase the pain. The medical men have proved that. Sure, if you're hurt badly in a number of places, you may not be able to hold up under it as well as if you're just hurt in one place, but the pain is actually no worse. And if it gets too bad, nature has a way of taking care of that by administering a general anesthetic, robbing him of all pain. Fainting is one name for it. When it hurts too bad for you to stand it any longer, the recording center of your brain just decides to close up shop and you go into a state of shock. But there's even a more effective painkiller than either shock or morphine, one that works every day and all of the time. The learned men call this the high interest level. Right down to earth, it's nothing more than being interested in something else more than we are in the pain. What happens to a prize fighter is typical of that so-called high interest level. They get hit and hurt. Hit hard and hurt badly and never know it. They're so intent on what they're doing that when pain is reported to their minds, the report is just pushed aside, out of the range of their consciousness. At the moment, they have more compelling things to do than just to hurt. And you know, there are some very few people who are completely insensitive to pain. You can cut them or bruise them or stick a nail in them and it just doesn't hurt. With those people, a small part of their brain is blocked off, and that blocking kills the consciousness of pain. But that isn't as wonderful as it sounds. Many times, a pain is a helpful sign that something is wrong and should be checked by a competent medical person. So, like it or not, you see that it is a good thing that we can experience some pain. But in the meantime, remember that you've already suffered as much as you'll suffer if you live to be 1,000, and don't fear pain. That's a part of the picture. You got a good friend on your side in Mother Nature. But just between us, that's it for today.
You've been listening to Knox Manning in another of his informative and entertaining programs of storytelling. Any comments regarding the program should be addressed to Knox Manning, Armed Forces Radio, Los Angeles, USA. Remember, all the stories told are just between us. This program was produced by Carl Hoffenberg. This is the United States Armed Forces Radio Service, the voice of information and education.